6 vehicles that carved the fate of the North African Desert War. This is their story.
It was obsolete before the sands of Libya fully swallowed its tracks, and yet for 18 months it was the spine of the Afrika Korps. The Panzer III entered North Africa as Germany's primary medium tank, a platform developed through successive upgrades stretching back to 1936. Its Ausf J variant represented the culmination of hard lessons learned in France and the early Eastern Front, arriving in theater with a long 50mm Kwk-38 gun and additional frontal armor bolted over the original hull. Over 4,000 Panzer IIIs of all variants were built, and the J alone accounted for more than 1,600 of those frames, enough to matter enormously. In the Western Desert, the Ausf J formed the strike corps of Rommel's armored thrusts during Operation Crusader in late 1941 and the drives toward Tobruk in 1942.
Crews repainted hulls in Dunkelgelb base coats mixed with sand and brown washes to survive the relentless desert sun, and they learned quickly that optical rangefinding in heat shimmer required patience their British counterparts often lacked. The Panzer III could not defeat the American-supplied Grant at range, and the arrival of the Sherman sealed its fate. The Panzer III was the engine that drove Rommel to his greatest victories before the desert itself proved too large for any single tank to master.
Thousands of Allied tank crews in Egypt learned to fear a single silhouette above all others in the summer of 1942. The Panzer IV had existed since 1936 as a fire support vehicle, its short-barreled howitzer designed to lob high explosive rounds at infantry positions rather than punch through armor. The Ausf II changed everything. Engineers fitted the long 75mm Kwk-40 gun with a muzzle velocity that outranged every tank the British 8th Army deployed at the time, effectively handing Rommel a qualitative advantage that shifted the entire strategic calculus of the Desert War. Approximately 175 Ausf II variants were produced before the line transitioned to the Ausf G. Small numbers, but devastating in concentration. At Gazala in May 1942, these machines tore through Grant and Crusader tanks at distances those Allied crews could not effectively return fire.
Rommel called the long-barreled Panzer IV his finest weapon in Africa, and the Allied after-action reports filed after Gazala used far less complimentary language. The Panzer IV Ausf II did not win the Desert War, but it proved that qualitative superiority could override numerical disadvantage, a lesson that echoed through every subsequent tank design of the conflict. 56 tons of steel, a gun that could kill any Allied tank at 2,000 meters, and fewer than 50 examples ever reached North Africa. The Tiger I arrived in Tunisia in November 1942 as part of a desperate German response to the Allied Torch landings, representing the first operational deployment of this iconic heavy tank anywhere in the world. Its 88mm Kwk-36 gun was derived directly from the legendary Flak 18 anti-aircraft cannon, a lineage that gave it firepower so disproportionate to anything it faced that Allied commanders initially refused to believe field reports. Brutal in the numbers. In Tunisia, the Tiger operated with Schwer Panzerabteilung 501 and later 504, fielding never more than a handful of operational vehicles at any given moment, due to the enormous logistical strain of supplying such complex machinery across a contested Mediterranean. The weight that made it lethal also made it a maintenance nightmare on sandy ground.
At Taborba and along the Medjez El Bab corridor in December 1942, Tigers absorbed anti-tank fire that would have destroyed lighter tanks outright and returned accurate fire from distances that left British and American crews helpless. The desert finish was a raw application of Dunkelgelb over original dark gray, often supplemented with local ochre pigments by crews in the field. The Tiger I in Tunisia proved that even invincible armor eventually surrenders to supply lines, but every crew that faced one never forgot it.
No armored formation in history moved faster across open desert than a Panzer Grenadier Company mounted in these half-tracks. The Sd.Kfz 251 was conceived in the late 1930s as a purpose-built infantry carrier, designed to keep motorized soldiers protected and mobile enough to exploit the gaps that tanks punch through enemy lines. The Ausf-B variant, with its revised superstructure and improved vision ports, was among the earliest versions shipped to North Africa, where the open terrain validated the entire doctrine of mechanized combined arms in ways that no European forest or hedgerow could replicate. Over 15,000 Sd.Kfz 251 vehicles of all variants were eventually manufactured. The 251 carried 10 fully equipped infantry in a lightly armored compartment with a forward MG-34 mount providing suppressive fire on the approach to objectives. Its front wheels steered while the rear tracks drove, a hybrid arrangement that gave reasonable road speed and adequate cross-country performance on hard-pan desert, though deep sand created bogging hazards that crews learned to navigate with sand channels and careful throttle work. During Rommel's sweeping advances of 1942, Panzer Grenadier battalions mounted in 251s followed tank columns within minutes, securing ground before the enemy could reorganize. These vehicles were the connective tissue of the Afrika Korps. The half-track turned tanks from breakthrough weapons into territory that could actually be held. German commanders knew the position of every major Allied formation in the Western Desert days before any shot was fired, and this 8-wheeled machine was a primary reason why. The Sd.Kf 232 was the radio-equipped variant of the heavy armored car series, distinguished by its large-frame aerial mounted above the turret and a long-range Fu-11 radio set, capable of communicating directly with divisional headquarters at ranges that outstripped any wheeled vehicle in British service. Developed through the 1930s, the 8-wheel drive and 8-wheel steering arrangement gave it a cross-country agility that shocked opponents accustomed to the limitations of conventional wheeled vehicles. The all-wheel steering meant it could be driven from either end of the hull, a feature that saved entire crews when retreat under fire was the only option. Armed with a 20mm KWK-30 autocannon and a coaxial MG-34, the 232 was not designed to fight, but to find, fix, and report. In the vast expanses of Cyrenaica and the Egyptian frontier, reconnaissance companies equipped with these vehicles ranged far ahead of the main armored columns, mapping minefields, identifying defensive positions, and transmitting position reports that allowed Rommel to plan his armored thrusts hours before British intelligence had equivalent information. The Sd.Kfz 232 did not win battles by shooting anything. It won them by knowing everything first. Improvisation born of desperation produced one of the most effective tank killers the Afrika Korps ever fielded. The Marder III was a direct response to the catastrophic encounter with Soviet armor on the Eastern Front, where existing German anti-tank guns consistently failed to penetrate enemy tanks at practical combat ranges. Engineers at Alket mounted a modified version of the captured Soviet 76.2mm field gun and later the German 75mm PaK-40 onto the chassis of the Czech-built Panzer 38T, creating an open-topped tank destroyer in a matter of weeks. Rushed, unrefined, devastatingly effective. The OSF-H variant, fitted with the 75mm Pak 43, saw service in Tunisia from early 1943, where its gun could destroy virtually any Allied tank in theater, including the Churchill infantry tank that proved troublesome to lighter anti-tank weapons.
The open superstructure that made crews vulnerable to artillery fragments and small arms fire also gave commanders an unobstructed field of view and the ability to engage targets quickly across the flat desert terrain. Approximately 275 OSF-H vehicles were built. It was a converted compromise sitting on someone else's chassis, and yet it consistently outperformed tanks that cost twice as much to produce. The M3 Marder proved that in war, the right gun on any platform beats the wrong gun on a perfect one. 6 machines, 1 theater, and a war decided as much by logistics and distance as by armor and firepower. The Afrika Korps brought some of the most capable fighting vehicles of the early war period into the most unforgiving terrain on Earth, and for a time, it nearly worked. From the Panzer III to the Tiger, from the reconnaissance cars to the improvised tank destroyers, each vehicle tells a story of adaptation, ambition, and the hard ceiling that supply lines impose on even the most brilliantly led armored force. The desert swallowed them all in the end, but they left a mark that changed how armies thought about armored warfare forever.